All right. Do you remember that day when you sat down in the doctor's office and they told you that you had multiple sclerosis? Or maybe you weren't at the doctor's office. Maybe you were at home. In my case, I was at home. And they said, you have MS. My neurologist said, you have MS. Not a huge surprise, but I think the big surprise was, where do I go from here? And I wasn't really expecting how lonely this journey was going to be in the first 2 years. I thought, like all diseases or all sicknesses, we would take a pill and we'd be fine. And that just didn't turn out to be the case. And the more people I talk to, the more people say that first 2 years is very, very, very difficult because we feel alone. We're getting bombarded by the science, we're getting bombarded by the facts, and we're getting bombarded with the reality that we may be living with this thing for the rest of our lives. Well, back up to 2019, and I remember that day distinctly. And then a few days later, someone came up to me and they said, you know, a colleague of mine knows this podcast, and this podcast is this guy that talks all about multiple sclerosis. And I thought, well, there's lots of those. And they said, no, this is different. And so this one person took a very deeply personal and frankly tragic situation with caregiving and turned it into a global platform that has given hope to millions of people out there living with chronic conditions like multiple sclerosis. And my guest today is none other than one of my biggest idols, and that is John Strum. Hi, John.
Hey, Cliff. Great to be with you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us. John and I have been talking back and forth over email for probably 7 years now. We finally met at the Public Policy Conference in DC a few weeks ago. And I just wanted to tell him thanks because in those darkest hours when no one seemed to know what I was going through because everything was new to my family, everything was new to me, I could put in my headset while I was out mowing the yard or laying in bed because I couldn't move that day, and I could listen to John's weekly podcast called Real Talk MS. That'll be linked below. Make sure you subscribe to that. And I could hear the facts, I could hear the science, I could hear the experts, and it was so well crafted that I could understand it. I wasn't a researcher, I wasn't a doctor, I was just an engineer nerd who was a patient, and it spoke to me at my level, but gave me the information I needed to move forward. So I've always admired your format for that, John. It's always been a breath of fresh air in a world full of Dr. Google and magnetic bracelets and bee venom. To hear the facts has been very, very refreshing. So thank you for Real Talk MS. I wanted to ask you, I know a little bit about the origins of Real Talk MS, but what got you motivated to open this, to dedicate your life to this global platform?
I guess if I could sum it up in a single sentence, it would be to make it easier than my wife and I had it when she was diagnosed, when there wasn't that kind of a podcast. And, I think that one of the things that happens when you hear about some of the amazing research going on, about the progress that's being made, you, you can't help but feel a little hopeful. And unfortunately, that feeling of hope was missing from my wife's MS journey. And I thought if I could make it easier on people, if I could let them know that maybe they won't have to deal with quite as much as they are dealing with today, uh, it's worth doing. And I'm happy to do it every week.
So John, I read that your wife, Jeane, I think was her name.
Yes.
I read that she was, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I read that she had been riding her bike up like 40 miles a day or 40 miles a week up until the point her fingers started twitching. That was like her first symptom. Is that right?
She rode her bike 40 miles every morning and 100 over the weekend, what bikers call a century. And she did that even when her fingers were twitching. She did it until she could no longer balance on her bike.
Wow. And how long did it take from those first symptoms to the point to where you guys thought, okay, we're kind of in trouble here and we don't really know what's going on. Where were you where we all go through that length of time there where we're like, okay, we've got it, maybe we don't have a diagnosis yet, something's wrong, or maybe we did get a diagnosis. Where do we go from here? Was that like a year? Was it 6 months?
Um, from the time we first noticed a tiny little twitch in Jeane's pinky finger to the time she was diagnosed was about 90 days. In those 90 days, we didn't worry about anything because there was nothing concrete to worry about. And we were both of the mind that we didn't need to make up things to worry about. So we really waited for the diagnosis. When the diagnosis came, I can't say it was worrisome. It obviously was going to be life changing. And I think even initially, we both realized it, and neither of us realized to what extent it would be life changing. Um, but Jeane had a very rare progression. It was very fast. She went from riding those 40 miles a day to being wheelchair bound within 3 years. And within 6 years, she was bedbound. Uh, so things happened quickly. Within 6 years, she had lost her ability to move her arms, her legs, her hands. She had speech issues, cognitive decline. She had uh, major swallowing issues, and so she received all her nutrition by feeding tube. Um, and she developed some breathing issues along the way. So there was lots going on there. And I'm happy to remind all of your viewers that her MS journey is by no means a typical MS journey.
Right, right. And it's a sad thing, but I think it's really an important story to tell, that we've got to stay on top of these things because they can go south quickly. So I'm assuming she just, I mean, clearly was primary progressive. That was her final diagnosis.
No, her diagnosis was secondary progressive, which was interesting because, as I'm sure you know, secondary progressive is something you transition into from relapsing remitting. And yet she couldn't think of relapsing remitting as being part of her world. But once you get that diagnosis, you start doing a deep dive into, well, when did I first have a symptom, right? And here's what we together eventually uncovered. 18 years before that, when she was still in college, she was a freshman in college, she had optic neuritis. It cleared up literally over a weekend. So, being a freshman with much better things to do than worry about your health, since she was feeling fine again, she didn't follow up on it at all. Then, fast forward about 6 years, she had a strange situation where she had a tremor in her hand, and it lasted almost a full day, and then it disappeared. About 7 years after that, she had a period of for a couple of days of uh, dizziness, and it cleared up right away. And then finally, I finally entered the picture. 6 years after that, we were taking a walk together on perfectly flat sidewalk, no obstacles, literally no bumps in the road. And she just face planted onto the sidewalk.
Wow.
And we went to the doctor. She needed a couple of stitches in her chin, and that was it. She was fine. Several years after that is when that little tremor in her pinky developed, and that eventually led to her diagnosis. So, what we quickly realized is she had indeed gone through a relapsing remitting phase, but each episode was 6 or 7 years apart, and no two symptoms were the same. So even 6 years later, she couldn't say, oh, yeah, this happened before. None of it had happened before. So she never put it together that it could be one disease or one factor causing all these different things. But, that's what MS does. So she had the mildest case of relapsing remitting MS, I guess you could imagine. A day here, a day there, 6 or 7 years apart, and then everything fine again. She made up for that time when she was diagnosed with secondary progressive. And as I said, then her progression was vicious. It was fast. Uh, People who are in the business said to us, we've never seen progression happen like this before. So, as lucky as she was in the beginning, turned out to be not so lucky later.
Wow, that's crazy. And that's what, to me, that, excuse me, I'm really having issues today with putting words in place, but you're probably used to that being around people like me all the time. It's hot out, so it's like things just don't seem to work. So she probably, and I just learned this a few days ago because I did an episode about smoldering MS being, now they're starting to suspect that smoldering MS is at the beginning of the disease and it kind of just lingers there. And then finally you get diagnosed with secondary progressive if you're that unfortunate. And so it's possible.
That maybe not quite it, but I'll say this: smoldering MS is probably not the term we want to use. It's a term that scares a lot of people. I mean, when you think of something smoldering, you think of a dumpster fire that's about to break out.
Sure.
And it's not really quite it. But what is happening is, yes, there is inflammatory activity that doesn't show up on a typical MRI, right? There's neurodegeneration that's occurring. And that's why, the course descriptors that we use today, relapsing remitting, secondary progressive, they're really not fit for use any longer. They don't apply to anyone. When you have relapsing remitting, well, you may feel better, but in fact, neurodegeneration is continuing. Secondary progressive, that's even, boy, that's even more vague. And the worst thing about secondary progressive is it can only be diagnosed in retrospect. Nobody can tell you the moment you develop secondary progressive MS. And it means so many different things depending on the individual that it loses all its meaning completely. So I'm looking forward to new course descriptors that are more reflective of the actual biological processes that are going on in an individual, not in a group. And that's going to allow for that individual to receive personalized treatment that's going to address what's going on in their central nervous system. And I think that is going to be some real progress, and we're going to see that happen.
Oh, that's a really good transition. And one thing that's really interesting about this is, when I first got diagnosed, I asked my neurologist. I said, "Well, what's the difference between primary progressive, relapsing remitting, secondary, all these things?" He said, "Nothing. It's all progressive. It's really just something we give it's a label we give to the insurance. So because there's specific to the drugs that are being used, right?" And I thought, okay, well, it's all progressive. Anyway, we could talk about that for a while. But so this leads me to what I did some research on you here. Or I should say AI did. So I did try to verify that it's right. Because AI, but just knowing you, you did a lot with this experience. You made things happen, and I see your name all over the place. Like, you are really a key player in the MS space in terms of policy changes, in terms of research. So I'm going to list off some things you did here because this is incredible. So you've had key advisory board positions and leadership roles with the International MS Alliance, Progressive Alliance, International Progressive MS Alliance. You were on the scientific steering committee for that. At the National MS Society, you're on the California Government Relations Advisory Council. The MS Society, again, you're a district activist leader, which is, you and I went to Capitol Hill and met with Congress. And then you also work with the leadership at I Conquer MS. So you're not just sitting back with all this knowledge you have, watching this thing passively go by. You are very, very involved. And I honestly didn't understand how important it is to be involved. And of course, we can't all do that because of limitations. But when we were on Capitol Hill that day and you and I talked later, I was just absolutely exhausted because of what we had done that day. We had really hit the pavement quite literally and just peppered that hill in orange. And we put MS front and center in front of the people that are making the decisions about our healthcare, about the research programs, about the budgets and all that stuff. They couldn't really ignore us. It was more than us just handing off pamphlets. It's like, oh, if you're going to go walk in that elevator, you're going to meet a bunch of people dressed in orange. They're going to ask you what you're doing for MS. And that was very, very powerful. How have you seen, I know you've attended a lot of public policy conferences, how have you seen that evolve over time? Has it got more powerful? Are there things they're doing right that they've learned from?
If it's gotten more powerful, I think it's because we, the participants, have gotten more comfortable in the advocacy role. I
Mm-hmm.
think over the last year, if we were talking a year ago, we'd be talking about the fact that Congress cut the funding completely to the MS research program. That's the only federal funding that's earmarked for MS research, right? And they zeroed it out, and that was tragic. It's not been a great year for healthcare in the United States, not on the research side and not on the clinical side. However, because of advocacy, we got it back. And hopefully they heard us a few weeks ago, and perhaps we'll see an increase in that funding for 2027. But so yes, I see advocacy deliver every day. And I'll tell you something else. It doesn't only deliver to the legislators, it delivers to the individual. I don't think there is anything more powerful, empowering than advocating on your own behalf, on having those conversations you just described with our congressional and Senate leaders. I think those are difference makers, and you feel the energy in the room. And I think you come out of that meeting, yes, it's exhausting. I think it tends to be physically, but also a little emotionally draining too. So you feel really tired, but you feel like you've made a difference that day. And I think that is the greatest feeling in the world.
And I agree with that. I was expecting to go up there and I was expecting to have to deal with my MS and deal with all the issues of being that active. And I got home from that experience and I'm not going to say bedridden. I was very worn down for the next 2 or 3 days. But the one thing I kept remembering while I was laying around trying to recoup was like, I feel like we made a difference. And if we didn't go down not trying, right? Like we made our voices heard. We were representing what was soon to be probably millions of people. We know 1.5 for sure, but how many people out there that are not diagnosed that will be diagnosed? And for programs like the MSRP, which are lowering the barriers to entry to getting a diagnosis. They're funding things like the blood biomarkers. You went from a $3,000, $4,000 MRI to a $100 blood test because of these programs. And that is really increasing the awareness of this disease. And I thought, wow, we're really onto something here. And so it's really worth fighting for. So it was great to see it. So I'm glad you see that, things are working there. And I remember the episode, I forget the number, it was probably like 200 and something, 300 and something, where you talked about how they defunded in 2024 and you were heartbroken. You don't show your emotions much, you stick to the science, but I could hear it in your voice that like you were just really disappointed that they had made that decision. And that's that's one of the things that, like, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on my channel here is, you talk about the science. You're really good at that, and you bring in the experts and you stick to the facts, and that's what makes you so incredibly credible in this space and such a great resource for knowledge. But the reason I wanted to have you on this is, like, I wanted to get to know the John behind the microphone, because we only see the people you put in front of the microphone. And I'm like, whoa, John's got a great story here. So I wanted people to be familiar with that, because you really are, I mean, you are boots on the ground with making change. Yeah, so that is just so cool. Crazy. And I sent some questions to you, and the more I thought about it, I thought, nah, I think John's got more knowledge than that. So he said, ask you anything. I'm going to ask you anything here. But basically, what Real Talk does, and what's done for me, is it takes the high level clinical to clinical discussions and then the patient to patient discussions and meets them right in the middle. So you don't have to be a clinician, and you don't also have to be a patient to get value out of your show. So that is such a really cool format. And because you had so many experts on your show and you go to all these events, I'm going to ask you questions now that have the $1 billion question to or answer to them. Okay, so let's see what I got here.
So I just want to be clear here. You're going to give me $1 billion for answering these questions. Am I getting that right, Cliff?
Very nicely done. Yes, $1 billion. Like, sure, write him a check.
I'm ready.
Based on what you have witnessed firsthand for decades, do you think we're going to cure multiple sclerosis in the next 20 years? And how is that opinion now compared to that opinion 5 years ago? This is going to be interesting.
Yes, probably. And I'm probably a little more sure today than I was 5 years ago, because I think all of the brilliant researchers out there who are working on cures for MS are going to benefit from the technology that they can access, the tools they can use.
So you think the tech plays a big part in making this happen? Now there's a gorilla in the room here we have to talk about, and it's the AI. Do you think AI is going to accelerate this cure process?
There is no question in my mind it's going to accelerate research. It's going to accelerate clinical care and change it for the better. There is no part of that MS ecosystem, and I would say this is true for every disease. No, not one part that isn't going to be significantly impacted by AI.
Okay, I would agree with that. It's interesting. I'll add my little 2 cents here, because I've said it on my show before. But, like, if you had asked me 5 years ago, and I was working in the space, I was in the radiology space 5 years ago. If you had asked me, are we going to cure MS within the next 20 years, I'd say maybe remyelination for sure, but maybe not MS. And then this AI thing came along, and really, just the sheer amount of research and control samples we can dig into now is just mind-boggling. Uh, and it's at a very simple, I mean, I see just using notebook LM, right? Like, you could do crazy research just from your home now. There's no longer the gates of the high tower. You could just get in there and really find out some very fascinating stuff if it's true. Like,
Well, you can, and I think that AI, I think that most of us use it. Uh, we like the chatbot feature. We ask a question, tell me about this, and it tells you all about that. And hopefully, as you say, most of it is true. Um, but AI can do so much more than that for people who understand how to use it. And there are plenty of people in the research space who do. It's not just about answering questions. It's about seeing things that humans will never be able to discern. And as someone from radiology, I know you can appreciate that, especially. The fact of the matter is, today, there are AI applications in work, not in development, that will look at an MRI from an MS patient and see things that the radiologist or the radiology tech who would typically read those things will never see. And that makes all the difference when it comes to being able to understand a prognosis, to understand a treatment plan, all of that. So it is just going to fundamentally change so much of what we do. And that we're not even talking about AI as a drug discovery platform. And yet, the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world have invested in exactly that. So, yeah, I think there are amazing things to come, not way down the road, right around the corner.
Right. Yeah, it's just incredible to think about that. I mean, I don't know about how you perceive it, but the last, maybe you just indicated this, the last 3 years have been, I say this in a very, very, it could be misinterpreted. It's a great time to have MS. If you've got to be stuck with a chronic disease right now, MS would be the one you probably want to be stuck with because it's got the money for the research. It's the one showing the most promise as far as a cure or at least management, and it's got the right people behind the movement. I've seen a lot of different spaces where there's a lot of things that just don't get the attention they need to. I just don't feel that's the case with MS. It looks like we're the money's there, the attention's there, and the capability is there. I think we're aligned for success. That's how I feel. Are we in the same boat?
We're probably in the same boat, but we may be saying things a little differently. I never say it's a great time to have MS because it's never a great time to have MS, ever.
Right.
However, however, if you are diagnosed with MS, I think you are living in a time where you can be more hopeful than anyone who has come before you.
Sure, exactly. Yeah, it's always a terrible time to be diagnosed with MS, but when you look at other diseases out there, things could be worse, and that's a mindset I try to keep to myself every now and then, even though it could be a little over the top. All right, let's move on. We've got 177 people on Capitol Hill, roughly, give or take 5 or 6. I don't know what it is for the public policy conference this year. And you've been to these before. I think we touched on this just slightly, just earlier, just a little bit. What do you, and we talk about the research and we talk about the science, but what makes the MS community unique when it comes to being successful about obtaining or achieving our missions on Capitol Hill? Like, what is it about the patient population that just makes us get the job done? Because I noticed something unique, but I wanted to get your take on this.
Well, that's a good question. I think when I think about the patient population, obviously everyone is highly motivated to get the job done. I think what helps a great deal is the bit of training they receive from the MS Society advocacy team. We don't go in talking about whatever is top of mind for us that day, do we? Instead, we are all clear on the issues that we're going to discuss. We've all put together the kind of, you know, verbal presentation based on a formula that incorporates both the personal story. So you get to share that part of your MS journey. You connect it to the issue that you're talking about and explain how getting legislation passed or getting funding is going to mitigate the situation you've just described. And then you're very clear in what the ask is. We want you to vote yes on, or we want you to sign a dear colleague letter, or whatever the next step happens to be. But I think that it's put together in such a way that it's easy for the legislative staff to digest. They get it quickly, and at the same time, it gives everyone who's there, all of the participants in the public policy conference, an opportunity to share their story, their MS journey. And I think that that's what makes the ask so powerful, is that it's personalized, it's connected to somebody's real life.
That's great. Yeah, I felt that. I felt that when we were in the room I feel like that could be their brother. That could be their, I'm talking about the people on the other side of the table. They're looking at a person with this thing, and we are now relatable. We are not a statistic anymore. And that seemed to have some kind of an impact. It could be someone they know. It could be their friend. In fact, I had somebody tell me that. They said, "Oh yeah, I've got a friend that lives in Greensboro who's got MS," and they were part of a staffer position.
Absolutely. It should be one of the first questions everybody asks at a meeting. Ask that staff member, do you know anyone living with MS? I ask all the time, and more times than not, the answer is yes. I ask them who, I ask them, and it could be a family member, but it could also be a friend, it could be a neighbor, it could be a teacher they had. I've heard it all. And that really drives it home. And then you find out how they're doing. And then you can explain how whatever it is you're there to talk about could make a difference in that person's life.
Absolutely, that's great. Okay, so we got 4 minutes left here. I'm going to say this because I think it's really, really important. So everybody, you can see why John is where he's at in the MS community. He's just knowledgeable. He's really wrapped together a solid message of, I think, bringing hope and inspiration to people through science research and knowledge, because knowledge is all we have at the end of the day with this thing right now. And that empowers us on our worst days. I always think to myself, I might be dealing with this today, but what about tomorrow? And tomorrow might be 20 years off. It doesn't matter. But the idea is there are people like you out there that are helping us get there. So I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Real Talk MS, your show. 450 episodes, a million downloads, 100 countries, and constantly within the top 5 MS podcasts on the planet. Wow. That's impressive.
I've got to correct you a little bit.
Okay, go.
4 million downloads.
You're at 4 million now? See, that's what I thought, because you were at a million like 3 years ago. Yeah, 4 million downloads. And I think you're at more than 100 countries now, but I verified the 450 episodes. So, sneak peek, what's coming up for episode 451? Are we allowed to know?
Let's see. Episode 451 is going to be an interview with a principal investigator and a participant in a study that looked at exercise not to improve physical ability this time, but to improve depression.
Mm, that's a good one.
One out of every two people with MS at some point is going to deal with clinical depression. And unfortunately, there are solutions that work for the general population that don't seem to work as well for people with MS. And just to be clear, we're not talking about being sad because you were diagnosed or being sad because you had a bad few days even. We're talking about depression that gets in the way of everything in life, sometimes gets in the way of getting out of bed in the morning. And you don't have to live with that. Hey, excuse me, we can't cure depression or we can't cure MS, but we can work on depression. And what they have found, and by the way, they have found depression to be a symptom, not a side effect of MS. You can see it on functional MRI. So what all that means is there's a trial going on, exercise as a means of improving and mitigating MS related depression. And we get to talk to not only the person who is running that trial, but somebody living with MS, with secondary progressive MS, who has gone through the trial and really get their perspective on what it's meant for them in terms of quality of life.
Awesome. That's great. That's funny. My next episode is on one of my usual viewers wrote in and said, "Can you please describe depression and anxiety as being a chronic ailment of MS and not necessarily a result of just living with MS?" And so these are right on the same thing, right on the same topic. And if you turned my camera around right now, you would see my exercise bike, which I constantly do 3 or 4 times a week because it's the only way to get rid of that thing in the morning where I'm like, I can't do this today. I can't do anything today. It
Well, you
works.
want to talk about brain fog? I just had it. That is not episode 451. That's coming up in a couple episodes down the road, but it's fresh in my mind. Let me tell you about episode 451 because it's really worthwhile. Next week is the American Association of Neurology annual meeting. Dr. Ludwig Kapos is receiving the Distel Prize for MS research. And next week's interview is a fascinating conversation with a guy who has done more for MS clinical trials than any single individual on earth.
Awesome. Catch it on Real Talk MS. It's on iTunes and on Spotify, right?
Yes.
John, thank you so much. I'm going to have you back on again. You're awesome. Thank you.
Happy to do it, Cliff.